very excited to be here and talk a little bit more.
Excellent. Well, let's start. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and also your role at better.com? I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I'll try to keep it short. So I started my career in a sales role, kind of figured out pretty early on it wasn't really for me. I wasn't super motivated by commission-based roles. So from there, I pivoted into a consulting role, had some good experience, but again, kind of had that feeling it wasn't for me. And so when I was looking for my next role, I was really wanting to go somewhere, maybe a bit cliche, but where I could really drive impact, take on a more strategic role. And I landed on Better. And kind of to make a long story short, I loved the company and mission. And working with the recruiter, I was like, any role you have, I'll take. I want to come work at this company. And they ended up having a role on their acquisition team at the time, a growth-based role. My skill set was relevant enough that they considered me, and I landed that role. And so over the course of the past 3+ years after taking that role on, I've kind of worked my way through different parts of the marketing and growth team here at Better. So again, started in acquisition, pivoted a bit more to be more broad-based, leaning into kind of more email marketing, nurture engagement, product marketing. And then to date, where I've landed is overseeing the marketing program itself. So helping to oversee both our paid team, our content SEO social team, product marketing team, and our email team. And so really mostly just thinking about both growth, through a performance lens, but also through a brand lens, and starting to just get more consumers into our funnel and flow so that they can experience the awesome experience that we have when it comes to home ownership.
So I don't think it's cliche wanting to work somewhere with a purpose. Not at all. I think that's what ultimately I think we all want, really. Could you just tell us maybe a little bit about Better as well, just for anyone that isn't aware of what Better is?
Yeah, I like to joke that we are like the fastest growing company in the US that not many people know of, which is obviously an exciting opportunity as a marketer, and more to come there. With that being said, though, if you're not familiar, we are a homeownership company. We are a digital first mortgage provider, and we also offer real estate agents. We also offer title insurance, homeowners insurance. So anything related to buying or refinancing a home, we've kind of helped to make a more seamless and customer-friendly experience that can all be done online from, your home, from your computer or phone, but also with a human on the other end to answer questions and support you throughout the whole experience. So really just starting to tap into, again, a complex journey and, make it a little bit more magical, add value where we can, and ultimately save money and time for our users.
Great. That's interesting. There's lots of things we can dig into in a little bit. Let's first touch on the theme of the event, women in marketing, and in both of our cases, women in tech marketing, you could say, with technology traditionally being quite a male-dominated industry. I would go as far as to say you're in fintech, which is probably another step further into another traditionally male-dominated industry. Is this something that you ever really think about? Does it ever come across your consciousness?
Yes and no. And I know we talked about this in depth last week. It's an interesting dynamic. I would say the reason I say no off the bat is that Better is actually positioned quite uniquely here. So 66% of our executives are women. This wasn't done intentionally in the sense that we had a D&I initiative that we had to hit. It was more so a function of just really smart, scrappy individuals, either starting at Better and growing into these roles or coming into our ecosystem and kind of understanding the value we have to add. So from that vantage point, it's super motivating to have kind of that percentage and leadership team. And it kind of debunks that, at typical fintech, presence where it's more male dominated. The reason I say yes as well, though, is that it still does impact me. And it's something, unfortunately, that I do think about in certain settings, especially in areas that are more male dominated. I think marketing is interesting because in some ways, if you generalize it, it can be more female dominated. It's a function itself that actually is a bit unique. But when you also look to areas like growth that are a bit more data driven, et cetera, you can see the skew towards more male dominated. And so just thinking through kind of the dynamics there, confidence related to that, ability to both be well positioned to speak to both brand strategy and growth strategy is something that truthfully I do think about given the nature of that. But with that being said, again, Better, I think, has established such a culture where it's not about your gender, it's about your value add and your scrappiness and willing to be flexible. And so that culture itself has been really wonderful and something that has allowed me to not have this be as top of mind.
Yeah, that's a great point that you made, because I think when we were talking last week, I shared a similar sort of idea to you, that I actually look forward to a time when gender doesn't really feature as a talking point in the workplace narrative. It's just not really a thing. I know that's probably quite an idealistic idea to have. But yeah, 66% female workforce is a pretty good. That's a pretty good number. Is that spread across the whole business, or are there sort of sections where it's more female to male?
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, that's actually across the entire business. And with about, don't quote me on this, I think 80% or even more of the entire company rolling into those individuals. So just in terms of like scope and impact, again, super meaningful and super motivating. And again, not because it's about gender per se, but it's just about that it doesn't matter your gender. You can do these roles if, again, you have the skill set. So to your point, that is the vision as well, longer term. Sorry, someone was delivering a package. This is what happens during COVID.
It's okay. I think everyone is used to that by now, the amount of distractions you get. Something I wanted to get your opinion on is in my experience, and this applies to people I've worked for in the past, but also my colleagues. I feel that women tend to attribute much of their success to the community or the support system around them. Does this resonate with you, and in terms of how comfortable you are maybe taking credit for your own success?
Yes, and it's an unfortunate thing in some ways, but I think there's also a way to spin this, and it's a good growth area. And I think it's really natural for imposter syndrome to be a thing, especially for females. And it's maybe in some ways the sad reality, but it definitely impacts my day to day. I am uncomfortable taking credit for things. I maybe undervalue my impact or abilities, because both just based off my level of experience, truthfully, I'm a bit inexperienced on paper when it comes to marketing and growth, et cetera, but also being a female, I let those things get in my head and make me doubt myself more, versus others who maybe don't even feel those or have those kind of gut checks or moments where they're like, am I doing well enough? Am I moving fast enough? Am I adding enough value? So the unfortunate truth is that it is something I deal with. It is something, though, I have identified as a growth area. So I think, again, maybe a bit cliche, but at least admitting to it and knowing it's real, and actually even talking again to our executives. So our chief product officer is who I report into. She also faces this. So it's also something to realize it's not just you going through this. A lot of people and a lot of females in powerful roles probably feel this, but how do you overcome it and make sure that you actually are valuing yourself and taking credit where it's due?
I'm interested because remind me, you've got a team of maybe 15, 16 people, marketers at better?
20-ish. So I probably should know the exact amount, but we're growing so quickly. It's like hard to keep track.
And I'm wondering whether you see the same sorts of traits in your team as well, because I definitely do when I look at the gender split in my team, and I see confidence issues, and they tend to fall along gender lines. I'm just interested to know whether you see the same in yours.
Yes and no, which is also an interesting thing. I think I do see the trend with females more so, to be fair. I would say in terms of like growth areas, it's less often that the males that I have on my team who I'm helping with their development plans have this as kind of a blocker to their success. So yeah, it is kind of, again, the reality that it is impacting females more. And so figuring out how you can facilitate an environment where more real-time positive feedback is part of, I think, the cycle. Again, part of it is just self-confidence, so it is on the individual, but especially because we're remote, I think it is easier to only really identify things when there are problems, which again is a good thing. It's good to focus on growth and where things could go better, but keeping in mind that also just flagging, this went really well, even if it's a small minor thing, and layering in more positive compliments to those individuals so that they can start to realize they are adding value and start to move away from those areas of doubt.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great approach. Melanie, let's move on and talk a little bit about being a digital native or digital first business. You could say a business disrupting a maybe bit of an old-fashioned industry. I would imagine for you that data has become the most valuable marketing resource. And I just wanted to find out what you think about this. So At Adverity, we speak to thousands of businesses about their data maturity, and in particular, how they can use insight to drive tangible action. I'm interested to know what the data culture is like within your organization, but also within your team, within the marketing team specifically.
Yeah. So to your point, we are fortunate being digital first that we have really, really, really rich data and first party data. And so everything we're doing and kind of how you've summarized your company and approach is like using those insights to ensure we're being really effective with what we're prioritizing and doing next. So some examples of that, I think on the measurement side, and I guess taking a step back quickly, we are fortunate that we've actually really invested in our data team. So we have like really critical partners on the data side that allow us to be successful here. And so when it comes to measurement, we're in a very unique, well, not unique, probably there's others that can relate. Our conversion funnel is quite complex and it takes a while from, the point of acquisition at the top of the funnel to actually transacting and buying a home. I personally haven't bought a home, but for those who have, or those thinking about it, you start the process a few months, if not a few years, before you actually finally, again, buy it, transact, and get the mortgage. And so when you spend $1 today, you're not going to see the immediate impact within that day, week, month, or even quarter. We don't have time to sit around and wait and see the effectiveness of our advertising. And so having a really robust and sophisticated model around how we're spending and kind of the expected outcome is critical to our success so that we can move in real time. So our data team has built a really extensive ROI model that allows us to have a view of this channel where we're spending. Here's the expected ROI. And we're constantly evolving, tinkering with, and making sure that that model allows us, again, to be effective with the insights that we're gathering. So from a measurement perspective, it is critical that we've set up this framework to allow us to be successful. Kind of in addition to that, a few other areas that we think about being data and like the culture we have. So I would say, yes, Better as a whole is very data driven and very data first. And then within marketing as well. So on the flip side of that, thinking about like testing frameworks, can we be thoughtful about how we're testing the success of an initiative? There's a lot of good ideas that come to us or that we have. But again, going back to measurement, is it actually moving the needle on whether it's acquisition, conversion, ROI, whatever it be? Making sure a framework is put in place, making sure that we're thinking through if it's stat sig or not, making sure we're understanding the significance of it, et cetera. Is there external factors at play? Were rates moving? Again, this is where data and understanding all that is super critical. And then I think another element of it is on the more of the storytelling side. And this is moving a little bit away from like data driven in a sense, but data is really powerful for marketers or PR or communications folks. It is so powerful to tell a story, both about the trends we're seeing to position us as a thought leader. So how can we actually see what's going on when it comes to house buying, get in front of the trend, promote it, talk about it, and then equip users with how to react to it. So not news really anymore, but it's a really competitive market. People are moving out of the city to suburbs. Identifying those trends in real time and proactively acknowledging them and speaking to them is really powerful from both a growth and brand perspective. And then in addition to that, of course, just keeping a pulse on our users. So of the data we're collecting, who are we generally doing well with? What are we looking at in terms of like demographic attributes, but in addition to behavioral attributes? There's really rich data there, again, around intent and ability to convert, et cetera. And so being really mindful is important. I think that the thing I'll end on here, and when we talked about this, is we are very data driven. It's great. I encourage it. But something to be mindful of is that it is really overwhelming when it comes to how you use data. Things come into the mix around predictive modeling and media mixes. And what I think we talked about and encourage is it's one foot in front of the other. Kind of start with foundational baseline needs. Make sure you're collecting your data. Make sure you're capturing it somewhere and you're holding on to it. That will then therefore inform those things in the future state. But until you collect enough data, you can't really use it to model and do all that sophisticated stuff. And so don't feel overwhelmed when you hear all of this kind of buzzword and whatnot. I think that's where we landed and a good takeaway from that conversation.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you touched on a really interesting point that I just want to go back to actually, was around, you're quite clearly as a business and as a marketing function, you're fairly advanced on what I would call the Adverity marketing measurement maturity scale. You're fairly far along, and I think it's helped by the fact that you are a digital native business.
Right.
It must make your conversations with your CFO or your finance much easier to have. It sounds like you're very able to demonstrate what the effect of marketing will be on the revenue of the business. Is that's kind of what I heard from the details that you just went into?
Yeah, in certain parts, 100%. And I think what's interesting is we're at this pivotal point where we do really well with kind of the lower funnel channels. So the channels where high intent borrowers are coming to us. So the affiliates, paid search, et cetera. And so we have a really good sense of performance historically there to then inform what we think will continue to happen in terms of ROI and value add. At the same time, what we're kind of actually balancing is we're launching that new channels that meet users earlier in the funnel. And so those are more assumption based because we don't have that historical data to go off of to inform what's going to happen. So it's an interesting dynamic because yes, in a lot of cases where we're spending majority of our money, we have a lot more confidence and those conversations are easier. But as we pivot and expand our strategy and meet users earlier and meet those users who are 6 to 8 months away, it's an interesting balance of having more confidence in assumptions where we need to rely on them, knowing that we're working towards that sophisticated model in all states. So it's definitely interesting because the relationship, with the CFO or leaders and getting buy-in is that data is kind of king in those conversations. And so learning from what we've done and do well and getting their buy-in on the stuff that we maybe just don't have as much confidence in is an interesting dynamic to work through.
Great, thank you. Just one last sort of data related question, I guess, is I said to myself at the beginning of this, I'm not going to mention COVID. We're going to have a COVID-free 35 minutes. So let me rephrase my question, which was going to be, I want to know, have you got any examples of how you've adapted to the changing market conditions over the past year, for whatever reason that might be?
Yeah. I mean, the first place my head goes is like, how is my team adapted? And so a lot of this is probably what we're all doing. It was rough. I think we just do a lot better in an environment where we are in person, where ideas and questions can be run off each other in an ad hoc sense. And so I think informal communication is something we're still figuring out and trying to work through. I mean, Slack is our best friend, of course, and whatever, tool you're using equivalent to that, I'm sure we're all spending way more time there. But there's also that you're on a meeting, and so answering the question might not happen. And so with that being said, I would say we've done a good job both facilitating ways to just like build a culture remotely. So starting a book club, having like a monthly marketing hangout where we just do something like last month we did a meditation class. So things that allow us to bond a bit more. And then in addition to that, kind of figuring out ways to facilitate like working sessions or working groups, and also to beat the meeting fatigue. So I would say it's definitely been an adjustment. And I know it's been a year. And so like we probably should we have had it figured out by now? Maybe, but also like there's no right answer here of how to really figure it out. That's been the biggest adjustment for us all though, and just working through like the meeting fatigue and staring at a screen all day.
Yeah, how I empathize. How do you personally deal with it? I deal with it in a number of different ways by trying to do one-to-ones on the move, so I'm not sat down all day every day. I try and block time out my diary to get away from the desk. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But how have you made it work for you personally?
Yeah, see, try is where we have a similarity. I try to do a lot of that, and the truth is it's really hard for me to ultimately have these walks or go on walks. Something we are doing though company-wide, and we're fortunate that our CPO kind of proposed this, is we've blocked off all meetings from happening on Wednesday across the organization. So cool. There is like a no meeting Wednesday allowed, which allows us to break up the week, kind of use Monday and Tuesday to make sure we're prioritizing correctly, use Thursday and Friday to wrap the week up and do any retros, and then allow Wednesday for like free time and time to do working sessions or working groups where you feel like you're not just back to back in meetings, kind of just trying to like switch gears all day. So we've just started testing that. I would encourage some version of that. It is so refreshing. And last Wednesday was one of my most productive days since COVID started. So whether you take an hour of that, a half day of that, the full version of it, it is something that I recommend kind of seeing and rolling out and piloting.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that. No meetings Wednesdays. I like that. I might try that. A couple more questions from my side. Within your marketing team, sort of what skills do you look for when it comes to building that sort of data-driven environment? That it seems like you've already nailed that. What kind of skills do you look for?
Yeah, I think it's something we're truthfully also working through still too as a team, but it comes down to making sure we're really asking the question, like, what does success look like here? And it might feel really simple to ask that question, but as you can imagine, when you're moving really quickly and you're testing 10 different things within one campaign or whatever it be, when you're just testing so much, going back to like, well, what are we trying to do here? And then asking those like simple high level questions. It kind of goes back to like what marketers like to do. Like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And are we solving it in the most effective way? And then how are we measuring success? And so just going through the motions and making sure we're asking those questions is something that I find really valuable. As you can imagine, when you're so deep in something and when you're moving so quickly, sometimes the basics actually slip through really quickly because you're like, oh, this person came to me with this idea and it sounded really good. And so we're going to go do this and that. It's like, well, taking a step back, what does success look like? How are we testing this? So again, I actually find just asking those more broad-based questions is a really helpful exercise and a good way to frame all the thinking we have to make sure data is factored into what we're doing. And then on the flip side, again, something I think I can do better at, and therefore my team can do better at, is being a little bit more proactive when it comes to data and metrics. So rather than reacting to trends we're seeing, so we're seeing conversion going down. Okay, let's send this email. Let's get this ad on. Kind of be a little bit more proactive around it and try to catch the trend beforehand and or make sure we have a playbook in place to react to it. Because with data, it can move quite quickly. And so knowing like at what range does a movement mean we need to kind of take a further look. And once we see a movement that maybe is in the wrong direction, what do we put in place to react to it? First feeling like it's like chaos and we don't know what to do and we need to like drop everything to get it done.
Yeah. That makes sense. You touched a little bit about the channels that you're using. How is your marketing mix evolving this year? What do you think it's going to look like?
Yeah, so I kind of touched on it a bit, but we're really keen to both continue to grow out kind of outside of that affiliate paid search mix and really expand kind of on both offline and digital paid channels. Knowing a few elements are at play here. One kind of goes back to my early comment about brand awareness and who we are. We know that we need to start reaching users a bit earlier and explain like how amazing we are and the value we're adding. So telling that story in a more thoughtful way through different online, offline channels is a priority, but also just expanding the channel mix from a performance perspective. So looking into channels like radio or podcasts, et cetera, where performance can actually come from them. That's something we're evolving into. I would say something we've started to really do in 2020 that I'm super bullish on is our own channels. It kind of goes back to, again, both the mix of just, well, growing organic is a huge priority. But in addition, there's an element of storytelling and positioning us as a thought leader through that. So not only are we capturing organic traffic, but ideally we're actually saying or doing something that starts to build that trust earlier on. So whether it be a video series or a webinar or et cetera. And so own content and like snackable storytelling is something that we've dipped our toe in that I'm really keen to continue doing.
Snackable storytelling. I like that. That's a phrase. I'm going to steal that one.
I know.
It's a great phrase, snackable storytelling. So it sounds like you're focusing more on top of funnel, reading between the lines.
That's the succinct way to say it. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. How do you, out of interest, how do you keep up to date? You know, there's obviously a lot going on a day-to-day basis. How do you keep up to date with trends and what's new and what's happening?
It's hard, honestly. Like I was actually slacking one of my peers about, I'm going to mess up the name now. I think it's Clubhouse or something. It's in one of the, I'm so bad at not being on top of the trends.
It's Clubhouse. You got it right.
It's like, I'm really bad at being up on the trend, just like personally, that's like a personal thing of mine. So with that being said, to your point, something I think that's been really helpful is I've signed up for a bunch of e-newsletters that give like the really short of it around like SEO trends or just marketing trends generally. And so using those insights and then like clicking into the actual like article itself where I want to learn more has been amazingly valuable and something like the majority of my team has done. Like truthfully, I need something to be like in front of me versus like expecting that I'm going to sit down and like find a podcast that day or whatever it be. So having that proactively sent to me has been extremely helpful. I also encourage the team to come with like all and any ideas. So like truthfully, my like each lead within my team has quite a good pulse on what's going on. So kind of managing up and educating me is also part of the dynamic because again, truthfully, there's only so much time. And as you just saw, I'm bad at staying up on trends. So I also expect a level, I like love to learn from my team. Like that to me is one of the best parts of my job. I don't know everything. They shouldn't expect me to. Obviously there are elements of things I should know and do, but they educate me all the time on trends or things to do or try. And so that dynamic allows me to feel like I have a good enough grasp on what's going on.
I like that. I'm conscious of there's a question coming in on the Q&A. I've got one more that I want to ask you just before I close off and I go over to Q&A. Just looping full circle back to what we talked about at the beginning. You mentioned imposter syndrome. With that in mind, and given the success you've had at Better, what advice would you give to your 16-year-old version of yourself, given what you know now?
Yeah, I was funny because I know we talked a lot about this too last week. And so I put together, I think, a good answer because I have a lot of things I would say to myself. But I think the main thing is like, make sure you have a low ego, but keep in mind, having a low ego doesn't mean low confidence. Like as you start as a 16-year-old to obviously plan out your like next 5 to 10 years, you can like be aware that you might not know everything, and that's okay. Like ask questions, especially when you're early in your career or college like days. Like you shouldn't know everything, or therefore like why are you doing those things? So having a low ego and not being afraid to admit when you don't know something or when you've messed up or done something wrong is a super valuable skill set to have, because you will also in the meantime start to learn things and like become really well versed in whatever it is. But it also allows you to feel like you can still continue to grow and be motivated, because there's still like that next level of learning. There's still that thing that you're not 100% well versed on. So like if I could tell myself that, I think that'd be super powerful, because I think on the flip side, there's this thing that you feel like you need to have all the right answers and be perfect and polished and all of that. And like, that is not the case. And that won't equate to success.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Great question coming. So let me just read this one out for you. Given the growth of e-com and increased comfort with buying online across demographics during the pandemic, do you see your customer base evolving? How are you addressing what might be a broader target cohort than pre-pandemic?
Yeah, so I would say even within our like target audience, behaviors are changing. So the appetite to do things virtually is definitely way more there than it was previous to. I think something to kind of help contextualize is that we do a little bit well with an older demographic. We obviously have both a mix though of first-time homebuyers who are maybe 23 years old and 50-year-olds who are refinancing. So with that being said, within our even just target, we're seeing behaviors change. But in addition to that, actually, yes, people are more open to virtual stuff, but I think what's unique to our industry is that people who are younger, who maybe wouldn't have considered buying a home, are now doing that at a much larger rate than previous to COVID. Because again, the reality set in that I live in a 500 square foot apartment in New York City with my significant other, and we're working remotely, and I could have a house out in the, the countryside. And so yes, people are more, willing to do stuff digitally, and that works to our advantage. But it's actually on kind of the other side of it that more people want to buy homes earlier than they thought. And so that is something that like we're really reacting to and ensuring that actually those people who are maybe younger, who like digital first, we're meeting them with the right experience and product and allowing them to fulfill that dream of buying a home sooner than they realized.
Yeah, I have to say we've seen, so I'm based in London, and we've seen the exact same trend here. There's been a bit of a mass exit from the central of London, and everyone's kind of now moved out to the suburbs. So I can imagine. Would I be right in assuming that Better would make that process much faster for somebody who actually is a first-time buyer or who really just wants to get on the property ladder?
Yeah, so on like the stat is that we can do it 10 days faster than the industry average. But in addition to speed, the convenience and also level of education is, I think, also unmatched. So again, kind of goes into the complexity of the process rather than kind of just speeding you through and being like, you don't have to know what's going on. Like this complex thing just happened, but like, trust me, it's like, this is what's about to happen for you, setting the expectation, making them feel like they're in the driver's seat. Because I think actually by empowering them and educating them, that speeds along the process, because unfortunately, at the end of the day, like a lot of the work is still on the user or borrower because they have to input documents or information. Yeah. But the pace that they do it depends on their comfort level and understanding. And so it actually has a flywheel effect that we're proactively like setting expectations. In addition to just doing it faster, the things that we fully control, because they're more automated, et cetera, are just done faster. So that allows for a more seamless and fast experience.
Yeah. Would you say, just follow-up question from the last one I just asked you, would you say, aside from first-time buyers, maybe a younger demographic, have you seen any other trends in the last year in terms of the segments that you've had most success with?
Yeah, I think it is around the first time homebuyer stat, I think is the major one. But I think in terms of people's relationship status, there are some interesting trends. Again, generally the typical thing is a married couple of sorts is going to buy a home. But individuals who are single, again, who maybe didn't think buying a home was in the books for them, are actually thinking about doing it now. Kind of, again, that same behavior and mindset. Why am I in a tiny apartment when I could be elsewhere? So I think there's the interesting trend around that we're seeing as well. In addition, again, to just the age itself being pulled down. And then from like a geographic perspective, I mean, we're seeing just like, to your point, certain cities and states are just like having crazy markets where a house won't sit on the market for more than a day. It is like you have to have the ins of the ins to know what's getting listed. So maybe not a trend of our user base per se, but something we are seeing is just the competitive nature of the market. So ensuring that you are equipped, qualified, and have a really strong offer is more critical than ever. And shameless plug, things that we can help with and do really well and effectively, and from the convenience of your home, so you don't have to go in person.
Yeah. Just rounding off with a couple of last questions. You mentioned, and I wrote this word down because I love the word scrappy. I have the same sort of, I like to think of my marketing team as we like to hustle. Things happen behind the scenes. We make them happen. If you were sort of trying to get into marketing, what advice would you give to people in terms of their skill sets, areas to focus on? Some people might come down the digital route, some people might come down the brand route. What general advice would you have to them?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the data point that we were talking through. I think having a certain level of comfort with data and just like being able to cut it different ways, like even it's just like simply just like using a pivot table, like that is basically, again, just cutting different views of something to understand what is driving the most like granular piece of performance. So having like a baseline data background, I think is super critical. Not expecting to be able to code, definitely nice to have, but just in terms of baseline skills. I think in addition to that, to your point, maybe it's unique because we're in a really fast growing space. We're a startup of sorts, but scrappiness and flexibility, I actually think is so critical to success, especially in the earlier days here. Things pivot and change drastically, things that are good and bad, and being able to kind of pivot with those, stay maybe on task and or add to your plate because a new idea came or a market change happened. And so, yes, there are probably core skills around maybe like email specifically or content specifically, but at the end of the day, if you are able to be flexible and pivot in this environment, that will make you successful. And then you can continue to build and learn on those more core marketing skills.
And you mentioned Clubhouse earlier. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about Clubhouse because don't worry about that. If you had to put your money on a particular marketing trend this year that you think, okay, that like 2021 is definitely going to be the year of, what would you be putting your money on?
Ooh, that's a hard one.
I know, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay, because outside of like the environment I'm in, where there is a level of audience we're going after in terms of just like, again, age and like what they're interacting with, I think TikTok is an interesting place to be. I actually think for us though too, especially as you think about just educating quickly on buying a home, what markets are hot, etc. So I hate to sound cliche and say it because again, I'm so behind on trends, but I feel like it goes back to my point about like snackable content is just super powerful now. More than ever, we're staring at 3 different screens at a time. You have to get your point across in like the most simple way. And so whether it's through TikTok or again, through a really quick video that's in your YouTube or et cetera, that is where I see things going and adding value that way. And yeah, I mean, again, it's funny I'm saying TikTok because I'm so behind on trends that that's where my head went.
No, I think I would have to agree with you. I did have one last thing that I didn't touch on earlier, and it's around regulation and sort of how you could argue that in highly regulated industries, your ability to be creative with your marketing can sometimes pose a little bit of a challenge. I just wondered, firstly, if you've experienced that, which I'm sure you have, but also maybe some ideas around how you've kind of got around that. Because I imagine that anyone in the FS or the insurance space is going to be experiencing the same sorts of challenges.
Yeah, I mean, we are in a highly regulated space, and not only is it complex because mortgages itself is very regulated, but because we also have a real estate agent offering, RESPA comes into play. And so the dynamic between mortgage and real estate just like makes it 20 times more complex. With that being said, I think, again, ultimately, the reason these rules are in place is to protect the consumer, and better is very aligned with being honest and transparent with our customers. So in the past, it definitely has been a point of friction, kind of just understanding like baseline what we can and cannot do. With that being said, though, again, I think because our brand is so aligned with transparent, honest information, it actually hasn't been an area that has really stopped us from marketing what we want to. Yes, we have to add disclaimers in, and that adds time to the process. But when it comes to like regulations and how we talk about rates or ourselves, I actually appreciate what's put in place because we want to be honest and transparent. What I will say is when it comes to like the real estate mortgage dynamic, that is in itself just complex because we want to be overly conservative there. So in terms of process and our ability to market, it's more so just being extra mindful of it, being honest with the consumer, setting the right intent and expectation. So again, ultimately we message what we want to. It's just that added element of getting compliance's eyes on everything. I really can't imagine what it's like to work somewhere where you probably maybe don't have to have that because your regulations are a bit different. That sounds super seamless, but at the end of the day, it protects us, it protects our consumers. And so it's a big learning curve, I guess is what I'll leave it with though. It's a good thing, but it's a big learning curve, and it's a little nerve-wracking when you first get started.
How long did it take you to get used to it?
I mean, I'm still learning every day about all things mortgage and home ownership. But with that being said, I think after like 6 to 8 months of really aligning on just like what we can and cannot do and why, and it took that long because it came up in different instances. So the month we were focusing on rate language, I learned a lot about how to talk about rates. The month we talked about speed and closing. So that's kind of how it came about. And then as you can imagine, as we talk about new stuff, I'm still learning about it as well.
Do you talk to your friends about it? Because I have the same sort of thing where I talk to my friends around data transformation, harmonization, and I can just see their eyes glaze over.
My friends, I think they don't understand how behind the scenes we are as marketers. It is kind of crazy, freaky, but awesome what marketing is capable of. Like, maybe I'm naive. I had no idea. And like when you get like a customized ad or this thing triggered to you, it's like, well, you didn't realize that you did this thing the other day. And so like, honestly, when I talk to my friends about this stuff, they're just kind of like, okay, cool.
Oh, great. Well, I've been given the 2-minute warning. So Melanie, head of marketing for better.com. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Harriet. This is awesome.
Thank you, Harriet and Melanie, for such an amazing session. I loved watching you both. Definitely a lot of learnings, a lot of talking about pivots today. So definitely relevant trends, and definitely loved hearing about TikTok.